Hello, and welcome to Night Drive Stories. My name's Jack, and I drive the silent highways of the Pacific Northwest long after midnight, picking up those who wander these misty roads. Tonight, let me tell you the story I heard from the stranger I picked up near the shuttered diner at exit 47, its neon sign buzzing faint red against the fog. But before, if you like these eerie stories about the lost wanderers I meet along the way, remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. He was standing under that dead neon sign when I pulled off, tall, hunched against the cold, a duffel bag hanging from one shoulder. His face was lined but not old, the kind of wear that comes from work shifts and sleepless nights more than years. When he climbed into the cab, the smell of damp canvas and pine smoke followed him. He nodded once, quiet at first, and only after a few miles broke the silence with, "You ever hear of Black Pine Reservoir?" That's how his story began. I never planned to end up in that valley. I'd been living like a loose thread for a while, sleeping in bus stations, taking odd jobs where I could, moving west with no real plan except not to stop. Then I saw the flyer tacked crooked on a corkboard at a gas station halfway between nowhere and nothing. Night guard needed, Black Pine Reservoir Powerhouse, 12 Hitchhiker. A number scrawled in ink bled halfway off the paper. 12 an hour wasn't good money, but it meant shelter, maybe a hot plate and a cot. Better than drifting with frost stiffening my jacket seams. I made the call. The county clerk who filled out my form didn't bother hiding her unease. She stamped the paper, slid me a set of keys, and said flatly, "You'll be alone out there." She looked at me like she was measuring whether I'd make it through one shift. Then softer, "If you hear it, don't answer. Don't ever answer the bell." I asked her what bell she meant, but she only shook her head, as though saying the words aloud gave them power. The drive out was 30 miles of winding dirt road through pines so tall, the stars themselves looked trapped in their branches. The deeper I went, the more it felt like the world had folded in on itself. Abandoned bait shops sagged under moss. A rusted swing set stood in a gravel lot where children hadn't played for decades. I passed an old highway sign, riddled with bullet holes, pointing toward Graycross, 2 miles. Except there was no town anymore, not since the dam came in '65 and drowned it whole. By the time the reservoir came into view, I'd forgotten what it felt like to see another pair of headlights. The dam's silhouette loomed against the fog, a mile-wide scar of poured concrete. The powerhouse squatted at its base, a dark shape where turbines once spun, but now only shivered with leftover current. The shack they gave me was a sorry little cube of wood and tar paper, tin roof, cracked window, a heater that rattled like teeth. On the wall was a corkboard with a yellowed map of the recreation area. It was warped by water damage, the ink blurred in places. Still, I saw what didn't sit right. Streets drawn where the lake now rippled, crosshatches where houses should have been, and an X, bold and dark, right where the Graycross Church would have stood. The old man who handed me the shack keys didn't linger. He had a cataract that glazed one eye white, his voice dry as sand when he laid out my duties. Lock the hatch after dark, keep vandals and drunks off the spillway, walk the perimeter every 2 hours. That's it. He took 2 steps toward his truck, then paused, half-turned, and added, "And if you hear the bell, keep walking. Don't you ever stop to count." His boots crunched gravel until even the echo was gone. I laughed it off, but unease settled in fast. By midnight, the reservoir was quiet as a coffin. The water stretched black and flat, broken only by the faint shimmer of starlight. The dam's spillway whispered with spray that froze at the edges, leaving delicate white feathers of ice clinging to rusted steel. Every sound was amplified. The crunch of my boots, the tick of the heater, the drip, drip, drip inside the intake tunnel. It all seemed to echo back, like the valley itself was listening. I told myself it was just the acoustics of concrete, but my skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. Then came 2 odd a.m. The fog thickened, pouring across the water like a living thing, and from across the reservoir, deep and metallic, I heard it, a bell toll. One heavy note, swallowed almost instantly by mist, then another. Slow. Measured. I froze at the railing, heart hammering against my ribs. 2:17 a.m., that's what my watch read. Exactly. It didn't sound like machinery. It didn't sound like any buoy chain or turbine I'd ever heard. No, this was ceremonial, deliberate, like someone calling roll. I went back to the shack, hands trembling just enough to fumble the keys. That's when my eyes slid again to the reservoir map under the yellow bulb. For a moment, I swore the inked roads weren't faint and aged, but bold, fresh, darker than before, as though someone was still drawing them, as though they were waiting to be walked again. That was my first night, and already I wondered if I hadn't been hired to guard the dam at all. Maybe I was there to take a place left vacant for too long. You ever notice how places get under your skin faster at night? Black Pine was like that. By my second shift, I already felt the valley folding in around me. The fog came earlier, the silence seemed thicker, and the map on the shack wall kept drawing my eyes, like it was waiting for me to notice something new. That night I walked my perimeter round at 1 o'clock, boots crunching against gravel that sounded too loud, too brittle in the still air. The pine trees bent over the water like they were eavesdropping. Somewhere out on the black glass of the lake, a single ripple pushed against the shore as if something vast had stirred underneath. I kept my flashlight steady, telling myself it was a fish, but my gut kept saying, no, that was too big. By 2 o'clock, the cold sank deeper into my bones. The heater in the shack had died, leaving me with nothing but a thermos of bad coffee. That was when I heard it. A sharp, metallic trill. High, insistent. A sound so out of place I thought my brain was playing tricks. It was a phone ringing. I froze, staring at the rotary wall phone in the shack, dead for years, its cord frayed and dangling like a vein cut open. But the sound wasn't coming from there. It was outside, faint and hollow, like it was bouncing off the lake. I followed it, each ring louder as I stepped onto the warped pier. At the very end, half sunk into the planks, stood a payphone. The casing was corroded green, the receiver cracked, the cord snaking into the wood where no line should run. I hadn't noticed it before, though it had been there all along, covered in mist and shadow. And it was ringing. I shouldn't have touched it. Every part of me knew that. But some things you answer just because you're too scared not to. I picked up the receiver, cold and slick against my ear. A woman's voice came through, calm, steady, and wrong, in a way I can't explain. She sounded like an old-fashioned operator patching calls in the days of switchboards. "Grey Cross switchboard," she said. "One moment, please." There was a soft click. Then a man's voice, deep and low, like it was echoing through wood and stone. "This is Reverend Pike, first bell," he said. "We'll begin headcount now. Who answers the hill?" My throat went dry. "What?" I whispered. The line crackled. "Who answers?" he repeated firmer. "We must account for those present. 7 voices for 7 bells. Your father should have taught you this. Are you ready to relieve him?" That stopped my heart cold. My father. I hadn't told a soul in that county my name, let alone my family history. But this voice knew. And worse, it said it like my absence had left a gap in some old ledger, like I was supposed to be there. I hung up. Hard. The ring stopped dead, swallowed by fog. But the silence afterward was worse, like the whole valley was holding its breath, waiting for me to put the receiver back to my ear. I stumbled back to the shack, shaking so bad I could barely keep my flashlight straight. When I got inside, I slammed the door and locked it. And that's when I noticed something else. The map on the corkboard. A new mark had appeared. Where there had been a faint crosshatch of drowned streets, now a neat little circle was drawn at the edge of the water line, right at the spot where the pier ended. Next to it, scrawled in thin pencil, was a word. Present. My mouth went dry. Present. Like I'd been counted. Like answering that phone even for a minute had put me on their roll. I told myself I'd quit the next morning. Tell the county they could keep their $12 an hour. But then, just before dawn, when the fog pulled back and the reservoir settled into mirror-still water, I saw something that made quitting feel useless. Out in the middle of the lake, just above the surface, shapes moved. Not boats, not fish. They looked like rooftops, dark peaks jutting up through the water only for a moment before sinking again. Like the town was rising, testing the surface, then slipping back down. and I could swear one of those rooftops carried a bell tower. The same bell I'd heard the night before. I didn't sleep when the sky lightened. Instead, I sat on that cot staring at the wall, my hand hovering inches from the map, like if I touched it, the ink would smudge onto my skin. I wanted to believe someone else had drawn that word, present, maybe a bored guard before me. But the graphite looked sharp, new, not aged a single day. By morning, the payphone stood silent at the pier's edge, receiver swinging in the breeze. I checked the base. No wires, no trench, nothing connecting it to a real line. It was a dead artifact, but somehow it had spoken. When I called the county office that afternoon to ask about the phone, the clerk paused for a long time. Then she said, "We haven't maintained a line at Black Pine in 30 years. She hung up before I could ask another question. The old man who'd given me the keys came by just before dusk with a crate of supplies. I asked him about the payphone, but he stared past me like I hadn't said a word. When he left, I noticed his hand was shaking badly as he tried to light a cigarette. That night, walking my perimeter, I kept glancing toward the pier. Even when the fog hit it, I felt the shape of the phone in my mind, like a tooth you can't stop tonguing. I prayed it wouldn't ring again. At exactly 2:17, the bell tolled from across the water. My knees nearly buckled at the sound. I stood frozen in the mist until it faded, a weight pressing down on my shoulders like unseen hands. The phone stayed quiet. But that silence felt like a reprieve, not a mercy. I tried to convince myself I could handle it, that maybe the phone was some local prank, or my nerves were frayed from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But the next time I looked at the map, I noticed something worse. The streets inked beneath the water seemed darker, thicker, as though each night added new strokes to the town. On the fourth night, I took a pencil from the shack drawer and tried to erase present. The lead didn't budge. The eraser just tore the paper. That word wasn't written on the surface. It was inside the map, as if it had been waiting there all along. And then I began to hear whispers. Not through the phone, but drifting across the reservoir on windless nights. Voices layered over each other, like a congregation reciting prayers in overlapping rhythm. Always too faint to catch the words, always too close to dismiss as imagination. I realized, sitting there with my head in my hands, that I wasn't watching over the reservoir. I was being watched, counted, measured like an entry on a ledger that didn't belong to the living anymore. By the end of my first week, I wasn't just afraid of the phone. I was afraid of myself, because part of me wanted it to ring again. That itch in the chest, the pull of curiosity stronger than common sense. I told myself it was just the loneliness talking, but deep down I knew it wasn't loneliness. It was recognition. See, I hadn't told you yet, Jack, but I wasn't a stranger to Black Pine. Not completely. I grew up 2 counties east of here, and my old man worked safety on the dam project. He was one of those men who could hear bad rebar by tapping it, who knew the smell of a weld that wouldn't hold. He worked nights, walking scaffolds with a lantern, the kind of man who came home with river mud up to his knees and cement dust under his fingernails. And the week they closed the gates, the week the river was strangled and the valley filled, he vanished. The official story was that he'd quit, walked away. But that never sat right with me or my mother. He left his boots by the door, his lunch pail still packed on the counter. Men don't walk out of their lives without their boots. For years I told myself I'd find where he went, but I was too young, too scared, and too stubborn. I ran instead. Put miles between me and that valley like distance could cover guilt. And now here I was, years later, sitting in the very shack he once stood watch over. On my 6th night, I couldn't hold back. I dug through the locked file cabinet at the back of the shack. The key was taped under the cot, like someone wanted me to find it eventually. Inside were brittle manila folders, water-stained, ink bleeding at the corners. Memos from the contractor that built the dam. Most of it was routine. Safety inspections, payroll slips, requisitions for concrete and steel. But then I found a sheet stamped in red. Incident report. Gray Cross Spillway. Dated August 12, 1965. The report was brief, almost deliberately vague. At 02:07 hours, interruption occurred. Bells incomplete. Ledger unstable, safety compromised. It listed 7 names under a header marked bell ringers. 6 were neat, typewritten. The 7th was hand-scribbled, then scratched out so hard the paper tore. Jack. My hand shook when I read those names, because one of them was my father. And worse, under notes, the memo read, "All present except number 7. Ledger incomplete. Delay unacceptable. Proceed with alternate measure." I didn't know what that meant then. But when I looked back at the corkboard map, I thought of the word penciled by the pier, present. The headcount wasn't just some ritual. It was a ledger, a binding, something that demanded 7. And in 65, they'd only had 6. I kept flipping through the folders. I found a Xeroxed memo marked confidential, internal use only. It described interference from locals and listed measures to ensure compliance, including the repurposing of church assets. Tucked behind it was a blurry black and white photo, a steeple rising from scaffolds, bell half removed, men in hard hats standing grim around it. My father was among them. What chilled me most was the last line typed at the bottom of the report. "Bell must toll at closing. The water remembers who paid." I slammed the file shut and sat on the cot, my pulse hammering. The heater ticked and died again, leaving me in silence thick enough to choke. That silence was broken only by the faint scrape of something against the shack's window, though when I turned, nothing was there. Just fog pressed against the glass like a pale face. That night I barely closed my eyes. I sat on the cot, files spread around me, while outside the fog licked against the shack windows like fingers. At 2:17, the bell tolled again. Deep, mournful, rolling through my chest. And this time, before the sound died, the phone rang. I answered without meaning to, the receiver cold against my ear. "Gray Cross switchboard," the woman said. Her voice was like it had traveled through water to reach me. "Patching you through." Then Reverend Pike again. "6 have answered. 1 remains. The ledger calls, son of the missing. Will you relieve your father?" I wanted to scream, to throw the phone into the water, but the word caught in my throat. Instead, I heard myself whisper, "What happens if I don't?" The line went dead. No click, no goodbye, just silence. And from across the lake, I swear I heard something stir. Not the bell, not the water, but something deeper, like the earth itself, shifting. When I looked back at the corkboard map after the call, there was another new mark, a street name that hadn't been there before. Riverbend Lane, written in the same faint pencil. That was the street I grew up on. I tried to quit the next morning, drove the service truck back down the switchback road, dust kicking up behind me, my duffel slung on the passenger seat. I was halfway to the county office before I saw the road sign. Gray Cross. 2 miles. The sign was clean, green paint gleaming like it had been bolted into the earth yesterday. But I knew for a fact that town was gone, swallowed whole in 65. I'd passed the same sign on my way in days before, riddled with bullet holes, sun-faded and half-fallen. This one stood straight, proud, as if it still had a place to point to. I slammed the brakes. Dust choked the air around me. When it cleared, the sign was gone. Just the ditch and the pines. I turned the truck around without another thought. That night, I sat in the shack long after midnight, staring at the map on the corkboard. The pencil marks had spread. More streets now, curving through the reservoir. Tiny squares denoting homes. One was circled, Pike House. I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the location. Dead center of where the lake would be deepest. The air outside felt heavy, charged. I walked the perimeter, flashlight beam cutting through fog thick enough to bead against my jacket. My boots crunched gravel, but underneath that sound came something else. An echo, like footsteps pacing with me, a fraction of a beat behind. I spun the beam into the mist, but saw nothing. At 2 a.m., the air shifted. The fog rolled back from the reservoir in long, curling ribbons, and that's when I saw them. Roads. They spread out from the shoreline like veins, dry gravel gleaming pale under the moonlight, cutting across water that should have swallowed them decades ago. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but they stayed. Not illusions, not tricks of mist. Actual roads, leading straight across the reservoir. My father's words, what little I remembered, came back to me. He used to mutter, half asleep after a graveyard shift. Every road goes somewhere, but some take more from you than they give. I don't know what compelled me, but I walked back to the shack, grabbed the truck keys, and pointed the service vehicle down the slope toward the water. The truck's tires crunched onto the first stretch of Phantom Road. No splash, no resistance. The water lay inches to either side, black and glassy, but the gravel beneath the tires was dry, solid. My headlights stretched into the mist, catching rooftops just under the water's surface, shingles pale and glimmering like bones. The farther I drove, the stronger the smell became. Mildew, rust, wet wood. Like an old basement opened after years sealed shut. My knuckles whitened on the wheel, breath fogging the glass even with the windows cracked. After what felt like a mile, I saw it. The steeple. It jutted from the fog, half broken, its cross twisted sideways, the wood swollen and blackened by years underwater. The Church of Greycross. The one marked by an X on the shack's map. My headlights swept across the foundation, and for a moment I thought I saw faces peering out from beneath the waterline. Pale, open-eyed, unmoving. But when I blinked, the ripples swallowed them. I parked by what remained of the front steps, stone-worn smooth, weeds sprouting between cracks, and stepped out. My boots should have sunk into the reservoir, but the ground was firm, the gravel biting against my soles. That's when I noticed a glint at the steeple base. Wedged into the bell frame was a brass lockbox, corroded but intact, bound with wire thick as a wrist. My flashlight caught the contractor's crest stamped on the lid, and beneath it a motto etched deep. The water remembers who paid. My stomach dropped. It was the same phrase I'd seen scrawled in the old files. The wind shifted, carrying with it a low hum. At first I thought it was the fog, but then the hum deepened, reverberating in my chest like the opening chord of some vast organ. The church seemed to breathe with it, timbers groaning, water slapping against stone. I knelt by the lockbox. My fingers brushed the metal, slick and cold. And the second I touched it, the payphone on the pier rang, though I was a mile out, with no line, no receiver in sight. The ring echoed across the reservoir, sharp as a blade. I froze, heart slamming. Then I heard the bell. It tolled once, twice, each note heavier than the last, rolling through the water, through the stone, through me. And between the tolls, I heard voices. Not whispers now, not faint. A chorus. Men and women chanting in unison, names spilling out like a ledger read aloud. 6 names, my father's among them. Then silence, followed by a pause. Waiting. For the 7th. I stumbled back toward the truck, but the roads behind me were gone, dissolved back into water. The only way was forward, deeper into the drowned town. I don't know how long I wandered those phantom streets. The mist closed behind me like a curtain, and the road ahead stretched farther than seemed possible. My headlights cut through the fog, illuminating houses sagging with rot, their doors hanging open as though the families inside had only just stepped out. Through one window, I thought I saw a kitchen table set for supper. Plates, silverware, glasses half full. Water drifted through the air inside like smoke, catching on the edges of chairs. When I blinked, the house collapsed into black water. At another bend, I passed a schoolhouse, its roof caved, its bell long rusted through. And yet, faint as a lullaby, I could hear children singing. Their voices didn't carry melody, just syllables, rhythmic, mechanical. A roll call, names, repeated until the fog devoured the sound. The hum grew louder the deeper I went, resolving into something like breathing. In and out, the whole town inhaling in unison. I swore I felt it tug at my ribs. I parked again by the church. The lockbox gleamed faintly in the light, defiant. I pulled at the wire binding it, and the instant I did, water surged up through the cracks in the foundation. I stumbled back, flashlight beam catching pale hands reaching from the rising pool. Not solid, not flesh, just outlines, like silhouettes carved from the mist. They grasped at the air, not quite touching me, yet leaving condensation on my jacket. The bell tolled again, louder this time, shaking dust from the rafters. My father's name rang out with the others, his syllables distorted but unmistakable. Then after another pause, "Son of the missing. Ledger incomplete." The lockbox vibrated under my palm, humming with the same rhythm as the reservoir itself. I wanted to open it, needed to open it, but fear froze my hands. I knew instinctively that once it opened, there'd be no going back. I backed away, boots crunching phantom gravel that began to sink, water lapping higher at my ankles. The congregation's chant rose, waves of names and dates rolling like tides, and between them, something new, a whisper threaded into the chorus. My own name. That broke me. I bolted for the truck, headlights stabbing through the fog. The road stretched out ahead impossibly long, until finally, just as the horizon began to pale, I saw the shoreline. I never remembered driving back. I only remember sitting in the shack again, soaked, the map glaring at me from the wall. A new street had been added, Pinecrest Drive, and beneath it, penciled in neat, small letters, count complete. 7. Jack. The worst part wasn't the words. It was the handwriting. I recognized it. My father's. I didn't plan on going back to the church. I swore to myself I'd never set foot on those phantom roads again. But the thing about the ledger is, once you're on it, you're already answering to it. On my 9th night, the fog rolled in thicker than I'd ever seen. The shack windows ran with condensation, every drop quivering as though vibrating to some sound too low for me to hear. The map's pencil marks had grown bold, almost ink black, and right at the reservoir's center was a new symbol, a circle with 7 dots. The bell. The ledger. Complete. I tried not to look. Tried to drink through my shift, though whiskey only sharpened every sound. Footsteps dragging in gravel where there should have been none, a dripping rhythm against the shack roof like knuckles tapping, the faint whine of the payphone. It rang at 2:17 sharp. This time I didn't pick it up. It kept ringing. 30 times. 40. The tone warped, deepened, became a pulse more felt than heard. Then it stopped. And in the silence that followed, I knew. It hadn't stopped because it gave up. It stopped because it knew I was coming. I took the truck. Headlights cut through fog, carving a straight path down toward the water. And just like before, the reservoir parted, exposing dry gravel roads leading out across the black. But this time, the roads didn't just lead forward. They branched. Whole intersections appeared. Crossroads with faded stop signs, side streets vanishing into mist. Streetlights hung overhead, some shattered, others faintly glowing with no wires to feed them. I drove slowly, past houses half submerged, their rooftops glistening like wet stone. Curtains still swayed in their windows. In one yard, I passed a swing set, chains creaking though no wind moved. A stuffed bear floated face down in a ditch, sodden and swollen, its fur clinging to wood like it had just been dropped. The smell was worst of all, earth and mildew, but layered with something else, something metallic and sweet. The stink of water that had seeped through bodies once buried and now unsettled. I pressed the accelerator. The intake tower loomed ahead, an obelisk of concrete rising from the fog. Its hatch gaped open, fog streaming into it like smoke being pulled into a furnace. The hum poured out, steady, relentless, like the low chord of a pipe organ. I stopped the truck, grabbed my lantern, and stepped into the cold. The hatch door was slick with condensation. My finger slipped as I pulled it, hinges groaning like some animal in pain. The smell hit me instantly. Rust, stagnant water, and something like old blood. A ladder stretched into black. The hum was louder now, rattling the rungs. I leaned forward with my lantern, but the light was swallowed whole. The moment I set my boot on the first rung, the voices began. Not whispers, not faint echoes, but a choir. Dozens, hundreds, layered voices, rising and falling in rhythm. At first it sounded like singing, but the closer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't a hymn. It was names, one after another, spoken like roll call, each name followed by a year. The years stretched back further than they should have, before the dam, before the valley even had a town. Generations of debt, read aloud in an endless accounting. I climbed down. The rungs were icy, slick, wet enough that my hand nearly slipped. My lantern swung, casting trembling light on concrete walls slick with moss and etched with graffiti. Some names were familiar, repeated from the chanting. Others were prayers. Forgive us, Lord. Bell toll paid. A few carvings were disturbingly fresh, as if someone had stood here days ago. The tunnel at the bottom was half flooded, water swirling around my shins. It didn't move naturally. It pulsed, rising and falling in sync with the hum. My lantern's reflection on the surface bent unnaturally, stretching into long faces, pale eyes, and open mouths. I pressed on. The water deepened to my thighs, then steadied. That was when I saw them. The reflections. Hundreds of faces, packed shoulder to shoulder beneath the surface. Men, women, children, all staring up, mouths moving in perfect unison. Their eyes glowed faintly, phosphorescent like watch hands in the dark. My breath stuttered. I stumbled back. The faces moved with me. Wherever I stepped, they stayed directly beneath me, their mouths forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. They were counting. From the water, a figure rose. Not solid flesh, but mist given form, tethered to the current. A man in a yellow slicker, lantern hanging low. My father. His face was blurred, distorted, as if I saw it through rippling water. Yet the posture, the tilt of his head, I knew it instantly. He lifted a hand, pointing toward a rusted ledger box bolted into the intake wall. 7 slots. 6 filled with brass plaques etched in names. 1 empty. Waiting. Your shift, he said, voice bubbling like it was dragged through gallons of water. I gripped the lantern tighter. No, I didn't sign up for this. You already did, he said. His outline flickered. Water rolled around his boots, though he made no sound. The moment you answered the call, the choir swelled. The tunnel trembled with the sheer force of the voices. My name was threaded into them over and over, louder each time. What happens if I don't? I asked, the words tearing out of me. The water surged to my waist, freezing, pulling at my legs. The tunnel groaned. And somewhere far down valley, sirens wailed, real sirens, flood alarms screaming across sleeping towns. My father's specter leaned close. His voice was softer now, almost kind. If you don't, the water pays itself. I pressed back against the wall, scraping rust into my palms. The ledger box hummed beneath my hand, vibrating like it knew me already. If I put my name there? I asked. The water stays still, he said. The valley breathes another day. I wanted to tell him no. Wanted to let it all come down, drown the valley, bury Greycross forever. But in the distance I could hear the sirens, could picture children roused from their beds, families stumbling uphill in the dark. The water rose to my chest, pulling harder, as though the reservoir itself wanted me under. The faces screamed silently, bubbles bursting at the surface. My knees gave out. I slammed my hand against the ledger. The slot opened like a mouth. Brass glowed faintly. My name etched itself into the plaque with invisible tools, letter by letter, each one searing through my bones. The water stopped rising. The sirens faded. The choir quieted into a low hum. My father's shape leaned close. For the first time I saw something almost like relief. Every guard counts, he whispered. And now you've counted. Then he dissolved back into mist, and the faces beneath the water sank, leaving only black. I was alone. When I climbed the ladder at dawn, the hatch slammed shut above me, and the sky was pale gray. The reservoir lay still, calm as glass, but the payphone on the pier rang once, sharp, final. When I staggered back into the shack, dripping and half mad, the map was waiting. A new inscription sprawled across it in handwriting I didn't remember making. Shift assumed. Guard on duty. And under it, 7 names. My father's. And mine. After that night in the spillway, something inside me broke. Or maybe it was something that finally clicked into place. I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that the world no longer looked the same. The valley seemed quieter in the mornings. The fog lifted quicker, the water lay stiller, the dam stopped groaning with its usual ache. But that wasn't peace, it was discipline. The silence wasn't natural. It was enforced, like soldiers standing at attention, waiting for inspection. And I knew who they were waiting for. The first thing I noticed was the map. Every morning I'd wake to new lines drawn, more streets inked onto the corkboard without my hand touching it. Entire neighborhoods bloomed in graphite like mold across paper. Houses, stores, even playgrounds. And each time, one of the buildings would be circled. Sometimes the circles matched what I'd seen out there on those phantom roads. The church, the schoolhouse, the feed store with its roof caved in. Other times they were places I had no memory of, buildings that must have gone under long before I was born. But the handwriting, it was mine. I'd wake with graphite smudged on my fingertips, a pencil lying by the cot, though I hadn't touched it. The map wasn't just recording the town, it was building it. Through me. The second thing was the phone. The pier payphone no longer rang only at 2:17. It rang at odd hours, dusk, dawn, sometimes when I was mid-step on a round. Always 3 sharp rings, like a reminder tapped against my skull. One night I forced myself to answer. The operator's voice came through, calm as ever. Gray Cross switchboard, head count complete. The line went silent, except for faint static. And in that static, the names rolled one after another. My father's, mine, then others. Always 7. Always filling the ledger. When it ended, the voice said, "Guard confirmed. Shift continues." I didn't hang up. The line ended on its own, like it had finished its business with me. That's when I realized it wasn't the reservoir that bound me. It was the ledger. The ledger didn't care where I was. I tried to leave. God help me, I tried. Packed my duffel, locked the shack door behind me, and drove the county truck straight out of the valley. I didn't care about the job, didn't care about the paycheck. Let them send another guard. Let the whole thing sink. I just wanted out. But the roads wouldn't let me. I reached the highway only to find myself staring at the same green sign. Gray Cross, 2 miles. It was pristine again, freshly painted, standing tall as though it still had a town to direct me to. I kept driving. Hours passed, but every turn led back to that sign. Every path funneled me into the valley again. By the time the fog cleared, I was parked at the shack, heater rattling as if I'd never left. That's when it sank in. You don't quit a post like this. It quits you. Nights blurred into each other. My patrols weren't mine anymore. I felt like a placeholder in a system that had existed long before me. I'd walk the dam and hear footsteps pacing me, just a fraction of a beat behind. I'd shine my light into fog and see processions, lines of figures in slickers and shawls, children clutching dolls, lanterns swaying. Their heads never turned toward me, but I felt their eyes. Every one of them had once been a name on that ledger. I stopped calling them ghosts. Ghosts are people. These weren't. They were entries, numbers, and I was one of them. The more I tried to resist, the more the ledger crept inside. I woke one night to find myself standing at the corkboard, pencil in hand, marking names I didn't recognize. My handwriting, but not my will. Another night, I woke at the pier with the receiver pressed to my ear, my own voice reciting the head count. 7. Always 7. Sleep meant nothing anymore. Even when I closed my eyes, I heard the bell, the roll call, the tolling hum through my ribs. It wasn't just me. I began to hear stories from towns down valley. Families waking to bells tolling faintly in their kitchens. Farmers finding their ponds frozen still, as if time itself had stopped. A kid swore he saw a payphone standing in the middle of a dry cornfield, ringing 3 times before vanishing. The ledger wasn't bound to Gray Cross anymore. It was stretching outward, following its guard. Following me. The final straw was the night I saw my father again. I was on the dam when the fog split, and there he stood at the far end, lantern glowing pale yellow, his slicker dripping though no rain fell. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. My legs locked in place. Then he raised his hand and beckoned. When I blinked, he was gone. In his place, a fresh plaque shimmered into being on the ledger box by the intake. Sun confirmed. Shift assumed. That was it. The proof I didn't want. My father hadn't disappeared. He'd been pulled into the role until I came to relieve him. And now the ledger had me. That's why I keep walking, Jack. Why you found me under that flickering neon sign. I don't stick around anywhere longer than I have to. I keep moving, keep thumbing rides, hoping if I stay ahead of the roads they won't catch me. But the truth is, the payphone follows. Doesn't matter where I go, dusty towns, empty diners, motel lobbies. There's always a phone. Sometimes it's a cordless that shouldn't have a dial tone. Sometimes it's a payphone with no wires. Sometimes it's just a black receiver lying in the grass. And always, at 2:17, it rings 3 times. And whether I answer or not, I hear the voice. Gray Cross switchboard. Guard confirmed. I don't know how long it will hold me. Maybe until some other poor bastard stumbles into that valley, signs his name where mine now burns. Maybe forever. Maybe that's the truth of Gray Cross. Every generation, another watchman, another night guard counting the stillness so the water doesn't move. But I'll tell you this, Jack. If you ever see roads stretching out over water where no roads should be, don't follow them. Don't even look too long. Because once you're on the roll, there's no leaving. You're already counted. For a long time after I finished speaking, the cab was silent. The hum of the tires against the asphalt seemed too loud, too steady, like it was trying to fill a space left vacant by something unsaid. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel yours, Jack, flicking toward me every so often. Half to see if I was still there, half to see if you wished I wasn't. The fog pressed against the windshield, thicker now than when you'd first picked me up. Every so often, shapes leaned in from the mist. Trees, signs, sometimes nothing I could name. Their shadows dragged across the headlights like hands reaching. I sat back, duffel at my feet, and I swear I heard it faintly. The ring. Not out loud, not sharp like steel on steel, but in my bones. 3 beats, spaced too perfectly to be mistaken for anything else. I shifted in my seat, but the sound traveled with me. I wanted to tell you to stop the truck right there. To let me out, leave me walking the shoulder until morning. But part of me knew it wouldn't matter. The ledger doesn't let go once it's got you. And I wasn't the only one in that cab anymore. Your radio crackled once, just a flutter of static. You tapped the dial, probably thinking nothing of it. But my blood ran cold. That's how it starts. A hiss, then a whisper, then a ring. I tried to distract myself, counting the reflectors along the shoulder as they passed in the beams. 1, 2, 3. But the numbers didn't match. I blinked and saw them repeat. Red eyes staring back from the fog, over and over, always in sets of 7. I gripped my knees tight, whispered under my breath, the way my father used to when he thought I wasn't listening. Count or pay. Count or pay. The words didn't comfort. They felt like chains. The valley wasn't behind me anymore. It was inside me. Each mile we drove only stretched the tether further. And if you stayed too long near me, Jack, you'd feel it coil around you too. I think maybe you already do. So when I ask you to drop me off, don't argue. Don't follow. Just keep your eyes on the road and drive. And if your radio rings tonight, if you hear 3 tones that don't belong, don't answer. Whatever you do, don't answer. The hitchhiker's voice trailed off. Outside, fog pressed thick against my windshield, headlights bleeding into pale halos. For a long stretch, we drove in silence, the only sound the hum of tires and faint static from the radio. When I finally pulled into the rest stop near the ridge, he slid out with his duffel. He didn't say goodbye, just gave me a single nod and walked into the mist, swallowed whole. I shifted into gear. That's when my radio snapped loud, static sharpening into 3 tones. Ring, ring, ring. And through the hiss, just faint enough to doubt, I heard the operator's voice. Gray Cross switchboard. 1 more head count. I kept driving, deeper into the night.